Pastor here. Apologies that I'm not there, but Kaya, our Aussie, um, she opened up her little gash over the weekend. Um, she's actually laying next to me right now. Yeah, and my wife is actually away for work, and so we can't leave her by herself because she's got kind of an open wound. She's gonna be okay, but we just can't have her like messing with it. So I'll be out um, Tuesday and Wednesday just until my wife gets back because she works from home, and so she'll be able to hang out with her. So again, apologies, but someone needed to stay with her to make sure, right? So, okay, so um, I want to just go over a couple things that I wasn't able to, and then on Thursday when I'm there, I'll show you something that I wanted to show you for class today, but obviously I'm not there, so I'll show you on Thursday. But I did want to go over a few things with you guys before the you guys work on the assignment. So I just wanted to show you guys a couple things. So I'm gonna open this up. So I wanted to show you a little bit about some of these quote unquote titans of industry. So first we have J.P. Morgan, right? So some of the things that he was super involved in was banking, right? So today, um, Chase Bank comes from J.P. Morgan. Um, One of the things that he did early on was he invested heavily in Thomas Edison's company, and it was called the Edison Electric Company. J.P. Morgan's house was actually the first residential house to have electrified lighting. That was his mansion in New York City. But eventually, he started behind Edison's back. He started buying the stock in his company to the point where he owned the majority of the stock, and he that this is basically called like a hostile takeover. And so then that means that he kind of moved Edison out of the company. And so the Edison Electric Company actually became General Electric, which is still the company that's around today. So think about this, right? This guy was involved in the banking industry. Now he owns this big company. Eventually, he also purchases U.S. Steel from Andrew Carnegie, and he turns it into the first billion-dollar company. If J.P. Morgan were alive today, his net worth would be about $120 billion dollars, right? So we'll come back to him in a second because he is going to kind of be seen as the father of the interlocking directorate, which is a legal trust. Rockefeller, he is from Pennsylvania. He started this company called the Standard Oil Company. Basically, he got involved in petroleum. So, petroleum, so when we say gas, right, like gas prices are up, whatever, like, yeah, that's true. But really, what we're talking about is petroleum barrels. So, when petroleum is removed from the earth, and it has to be refined, you can't just use the petroleum, it has to be refined. So, it goes through a refining process, and then you get oil, right? And so oil is a lubricant. Now, initially, what was left over was another liquid, but they didn't know what to do with it. And eventually, because of these two brothers in Stuttgart, Germany, the Mercedes brothers, um, they're gonna create what is called the combustible engine. We're gonna have a use for that leftover liquid. So when petroleum is refined, you create oil, but what's left over is gasoline. So that's why oil and gasoline are connected because they both come from petroleum. So one of the things that he did really, really well was the transportation of um, the actual liquid itself. And so one of the things that he introduced was the idea, instead of using like the railroads to transport it, like using pipes. If he were alive today, he'd be worth $340 billion dollars. And then you have Andrew Carnegie, who's actually an immigrant from Scotland. He worked on the Pennsylvania railroads. One of the things that he did was he visited Sheffield, England, and he saw this new process of creating steel that was much faster. There was an English engineer by the name of Henry Bessemer who figured out a way to do it a lot faster. And so when he came back, he opened up the Homestead Steel Company, or Carnegie Steel, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right? That's why the NFL team is called the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if you look at their helmets, they have three little what look like diamonds. They're not diamonds. I mean, it is the shape, but it's supposed to represent the elements that go into the creation of steel. If he were alive today, his net worth would be about $310 billion. So, what are some of the things that these men did? They sort of, I wouldn't say created, but they definitely mastered the usage of some of these processes because at the end of the day, the goal of all three men is to create what we call a monopoly, right? So, a monopoly would be a complete ownership of an industry. So, a company, right? A company would be like Ford, right? A company would be like Chevrolet. A company would be Nissan, but they all fall under this industry of the automobile industry, right? So these guys, right? So for example, um, Carnegie, right? There was the steel industry. He wants to control the steel industry. Then you have someone like Rockefeller who wants to control the oil industry or the petroleum industry, right? And so they want to control those things. And the way to have a monopoly is to eliminate all of your competition. But one of the very first things that they mastered was that you want to be able to control the stages of production. Okay. So if you look at the definition here, business strategy where a company controls multiple stages of production, right? Key points: reduces dependency on suppliers and distributions, cuts costs. So let me show you an example here. Um, so let's just say that the company is Nike. Okay. So at the very bottom, right here, you have the raw materials, right? So Nike needs all these raw materials to make all their stuff, right? And then you have the supplier, the company that creates all the basic supplies, the final product, and then the retail, right? So vertical integration basically means that you own all of these things. So instead of paying someone else to do these things, right? So Nike, instead of like paying for the plastic company, paying for the leather company, they would actually own those companies that go into the production, right? Um, and so that's the idea behind this is that you try to buy as much of the process. Initially, it costs you money, right? But in the end, right, you're not paying someone else; you're keeping the money. And if you're able to do that, and you do that successfully, then you're able to kind of manipulate the price. Which leads us to the next step, which is you want to eliminate your competition, right? Because again, the idea of a monopoly is that you control the industry. And the way to control the industry, right, of course, is by eliminating your competition. Okay, so let me show you an example here, right? So let's just say that I'm Nike. Some of the companies that I compete against are Adidas, New Balance, and Puma. So Nike would love to control, right, and own all of these companies, um, because that would mean that you're eliminating competition. So by eliminating competition, right, you are integrating, right, horizontally, meaning from left to right. Okay, you are integrating. Um, all three of these companies into one big company, right? Now, obviously, that would create a monopoly. And one of the things that we'll talk about in the next few chapters is how that's illegal. But JP Morgan figured out how to do this in a legal way. And so, what they figured out was that you actually don't have to, if you buy the stock of a company, if you buy all of the stock, right, then you're basically integrating that company into your own. So if we go back here, that means that if let's just say Nike bought Adidas, right, 100% of Adidas, like there would no longer be Adidas, right? Now they would just be Nike, right? If they bought New Balance, there would be no longer be New Balance. But if they only purchase the majority control, so let's just say that if Nike bought 35% of Adidas stock, but the next person only owns 34% of the stock, Nike would become the father, right, or the parent company of Adidas. And I'll show you that in just a second. So, for example, right, here's Nike. These are companies that Nike owns, okay? And you can see that Nike's a little bit bigger. So Nike actually owns Umbro, which is a soccer like retail sort of company. They own Converse, they own Hurley, and they own Cole Haan. But obviously you'll see that these companies' names are not Nike. Why? Because Nike only purchased enough of the company where they are the owner, but they have allowed these companies to remain, right, their own identity with the understanding that Nike is the parent company. So what does that mean? So Nike, what they do is they take members of their board and they put them on the board of each of these companies. So a really good example of this that I wanted to show you is Disney. So this I'll share this with you guys on Thursday too. But if you look at Disney, okay, so Disney, the companies that Disney owns, right? So I'm going to move this over here so you can see. So Disney is involved in the film industry, television industry, music, radio, gaming, finance, theater, consumer goods, property and parks, publishing, digital media, etc. So, for example, a lot of you know that Disney owns Marvel, but they didn't just rename it, right? They are the parent company of Marvel, so Marvel is allowed to maintain their identity with the understanding that Disney owns the majority, right? If you look down here, right, for example, right, Disney owns ESPN, right? Disney owns ABC, right? And so I'll share this with you guys and you guys can kind of look at it. But again, right, the idea being, right, so again, Disney owns Star Wars, right? But they're allowed to keep that name. So Disney becomes the parent company. But as you can see here, they own a lot of stuff. Again, I'll share this with you guys. What this means is it creates what we call a trust. So a trust essentially, okay, is a legal monopoly, right? And I put legal in quotation marks because monopolies are illegal because it's bad for the consumer. But by Nike trying to do this, right? It's a way to kind of manipulate the system because Nike technically is allowing these companies to exist, therefore it's not a monopoly. It just means that the stock of each of these companies is entrusted to Nike. Okay? So, if we look at what you guys are going to do, okay?